preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Shalom. My name is Rabbi Goldie Milgram. I'm the newly appointed Director of Innovative Jewish Programming here at the 92nd Street Y, and it gives me tremendous pleasure to introduce Jeremy Dauber. He's, as some of you know, the Associate Professor of Literature at Columbia University of Yiddish Literature, an old friend of the 92nd Street Y, and he lectures here frequently for many years on issues of popular Jewish culture. This is the first in a series on this topic, and we welcome you to explore the many others that are coming. It's a very exciting series. And I also want to let you know that we have coming up on Friday, September 15th, a Shabbat Salon called The Jazz Age and the Creation of American Jewish Culture. It's going to be a very high-energy Shabbat Salon with Ted Merwin, the theater critic for the Jewish Week here in New York. And on Monday, September 11th, we have this series called Breaking News in the Jewish World. And we're certainly all affected by the breaking news that's happening in our times so much. And Clyde Haberman will be giving a talk and a briefing for us that night. And I will be there, and I look forward to seeing you. Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you very much, Goldie. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. I just want to say a couple of things before I actually get started, if that makes any sense. The first of them is that, as Goldie had said, this is the first in a series of 4 lectures on Jewish American filmmakers. Others in the series include Mel Brooks and Steven Spielberg, among others. And I just would like to tell you first that I hope that many of you will come back or tell people you don't like, if you don't like this, to come instead. The other thing as a result of that is that this lecture about Woody Allen is really about Woody Allen as a Jewish American filmmaker. That is to say, it is a slightly different lecture than one you would just be hearing if we were talking about Woody Allen as a filmmaker, or Woody Allen as a physical comedian, or Woody Allen as a balding, red-haired man, or something like that. So, you have to understand things from that perspective. The second is that if Woody Allen comes through the door, which I don't think he will, I apologize in advance, because many of you, if you're fans, as I assume you are aware of the scene in Annie Hall where there are people standing online, Woody Allen and Diane Keaton are standing online, and behind them there is a blowhard who is talking about Marshall McLuhan. And Allen is just saying, "Oh, this is terrible. God." And he finally grabs Marshall McLuhan from behind a standing movie poster. And McLuhan goes over to the man, the blowhard, and says, "You have fundamentally misunderstood my work." And I just want to apologize to Woody if he comes for that. The third and final caveat before we begin is that Woody Allen once had a routine in his stand-up days called mechanical objects. And he pointed out that as a schlemiel of a sort, and we'll get back to that, he just does not have a good relationship with mechanical objects. They don't seem to work around him. They don't seem to like him. And of course, in his inimitable way, he says that he is in an elevator in California, and it's one of those talking elevators, right, that sort of announces the floors and asks, "Which floor are you going?" And he has this bit of a New York accent, and as he gets off the elevator, he hears it make a remark. And this is a long-winded way of saying that I have here a DVD player and a remote control, and this is an extremely dangerous thing in my hands. So we're going to try our best, and it should work because John Kelly and Walt and Sean are excellent, excellent technical people, but I am not. So, all right, on we go. I don't think that for this crowd, or indeed for basically any crowd, Woody Allen needs much of an introduction as an American Jewish filmmaker, indeed as a filmmaker in general. He's certainly one of the world's most recognizable auteurs, one of the great American directors of the, of film. I was going to say of the century, but how long really has film before the 20th century? And as a result, I don't think I need to go through in great detail his biography. Just going to give you a couple of things to think about that may be helpful for the course of our conversation about him as a filmmaker. And by conversation, of course, I mean I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then maybe I'll have time for questions. He was born, as you know, in New York. He was born in the Bronx. But as a small child, he moved to Flatbush in Brooklyn, where he attended Hebrew school for 8 years. And in at least interviews, has claimed that he can read and write Hebrew, although I'm not sure what he means by that exactly. He went to PS 99 and then to Midwood High School, and is apparently the only person in his graduating class where next to his picture there is an complete blank in his high school yearbook. He had no extracurricular activities. He had nothing at all. And instead, he spent most of his time either skipping class as much as possible, often practicing card and magic tricks. And those of you who have seen his most recent film, Scoop, magic is something that he continually comes back to. I thought I heard a hiss with Scoop. No. Okay, good. When he was 6 years old, he took his first trip to Manhattan, right, which he says was unforgettable. This is a quote from him, it was the most astonishing thing that anyone could ever imagine. As far as the eye could see, he said, there were movie houses in every direction. This was in 1941 in New York. And soon after that, he, again, is skipping school to go to the movies all the time on the subway. He begins to see his first Marx Brothers films, which are very, very, very meaningful to him. And then sort of in his late high school period, he hears that there is a movie that is playing that has a naked woman in it. Yeah, and this, of course, is of great interest to Woody Allen. This will not surprise you. And he goes, and that movie is a movie by Ingmar Bergman called Summer with Monica. And according to Allen, the first time he saw that, he didn't know who the director was. He didn't know anything about that. He was just looking for the naked lady. But after that, of course, he began to go to these movie houses and haunt them to look for all of the foreign films. He decided to go into a career that would, reflect his interests, which was magic. And he played briefly as a magician in Weinstein's Majestic Bungalow Colony, which, for those of you who watched Broadway Danny Rose, it appears as a name, and you might have thought that, this is a joke name, but in fact, it was a real place. And soon afterwards, though, he realizes that he has a talent. He has just a genuine talent, like some people, he says, can carry a tune. Some people can draw, pictures. He could just write jokes. That was his just talent. He could just do it like anybody else. And at that point, as some of you know and some of you remember, there was a very common thing in the gossip columns that people would just write gags and they would put them in the mouths of celebrities to make them sound witty. Sadly, this seems to be largely absent in today's celebrity society. But, and I have done some extensive research, and I'm able to tell you what Woody Allen's first joke was under his stage name, Woody Allen. As you know, he was born Alan Stewart Konigsberg, took the name Woody from the clarinetist, the jazz clarinetist Woody Herman. And this is the joke. And in order to understand this, you need to know or remember that the Office of Price Stabilization in the post-war period was known as the OPS. You can tell there's going to be a good joke already, right? It's just. And so in Walter Winchell's column on November 25th, 1952, the following item ran. It said, Woody Allen ate at a restaurant that had OPS prices over people's salaries. Yeah, he got better. I think it's one of the reasons why later on he has sort of agreed to have sort of it out there, and people just generally say that his first joke actually was the phrase, I am at two with nature, which is, I think, a better joke, right? But, as I say, he got better. He started writing these gags and became a very, very successful gag writer while he was still in high school, which was good because his college experience was not very promising. Some of you may remember the line in Annie Hall when he says that he got thrown out of college because he cheated on his metaphysics exam, right? He looked into the soul of the person sitting next to him. And this was not true, but he did not, a very undistinguished college career. Basically, after a semester, he was asked to leave. And he, but that didn't really matter. He had a very successful career, first writing for television. I don't want to go into all the details, although we can talk about it. He did write for Sid Caesar, although not as conventionally said, he did not write for Your Show of Shows. He wrote for a later special of Sid Caesar's. He went out to California for a while, which at an early period he loved, and he began eventually, at the urging of his managers, to not simply write, but to get into the performing business as well. And at first, he was terrible, apparently. By his own account, by everybody's account, he just was a very, very bad performer until he realized that he would take the stage fright that made him a terrible performer, and he would make it part of his act. And I guess I really don't wish that this was not a wireless microphone, because all of the accounts of him as a stage performer would say that he would get tangled up in his microphone wire by the end of this, and he would look really constricted and awful and just terrible. But he found his milieu as, you all know this, as the neurotic loser who just loves women, who can't get enough of them, but they can get more than enough of him. The line I think that encapsulates this from the period, you may recall this line, it's from one of his stand-up routines where he talks about oral contraception. He says, before I leave, I just want to say a couple of words about oral contraception, which of course at the time was new in 1964. He said, I practiced oral contraception just the other night. I asked a lady to go to bed with me and she said no. Yeah. And that's how it works, right? You just wait. This is the thing about it. You just wait for the and people, rolls in. So it's a very nice sort of thing. And from there, people saw him. Warren Beatty actually saw him perform at one of the clubs at the time, the Blue Angel, and asked him to start writing a movie that was based basically on him. And it was a movie which was titled after what Beatty would say to his many girlfriends when he would pick up the phone and they would be calling, which was, anybody? What's new? That's the second movie, but What's New Pussycat is what he said. And that became the movie. And Alan, he wrote this movie, and he watched basically powerlessly as the producer essentially massacred the script and sort of changed it and what have you. The movie ended up being one of the top 3 grossing pictures of the year, so maybe the producer knew what he was doing, but Alan insisted to himself that he would never again have that kind of experience. And with a couple of exceptions, he never did. Many of you know that very soon, Alan arranged a deal where essentially, as long as he maintained within a certain ceiling of financial expense, he was able to have total control over his movies, which made him essentially unique, since, with the exception maybe of Charlie Chaplin, in the entire history of film in the United States. And as a result, when we talk about Alan's pictures, we can really say in a way that it's even hard to say of people like Steven Spielberg or Mel Brooks that they are fully and solely really his conception. They are, expense aside, what he wants to put on the screen. And so, I really think it is fair to say that although we can talk about any biographical things people want to talk about a little later on, the rest really is history. Starting with Take the Money and Run in 1969 until today, he really releases just one movie after another. Everyone talks about the incredible discipline that he has. As soon as he finishes production on one film, he is quickly writing another one. And, I think it's fair to say that he has established a body of work that, while it has some of its less talented works, obviously many of them rank as some of the finest works in American cinema. That's all I want to say about his biography. We can certainly talk about more later on if people want, but I really want to get to the questions and the topics of how is it that this body of work represents sort of Woody Allen as an American Jewish filmmaker. And in order to do that, I think we have to be honest about the fact that first, Woody Allen would, if he's here again, I apologize, Woody, he would hate to be in this series. That is to say, he has often said that he does not consider himself, right, an American Jewish filmmaker in the way that we are thinking about that term, nor does he particularly like Jewishness, at least as a religious institution. And that is because, according to Allen, it is not just about Jewishness. And this is a quote from an interview of his. He says, "I was raised in a Jewish family, but I am not a religious person. I have no interest in any religion at all, including Judaism. I find all the religions silly and unsatisfying and not very honest. I'm not a big believer that there's a difference between Jewish people and non-Jewish people." So I think pretty, straightforward there. And in fact, one of his rare serious writings on Judaism, which was published in Tikkun in 1990 under the less serious title, Random Reflections of a Second-Rate Mind, he takes Tikkun to task for its subtitle, which, as some of you know, is a bi-monthly Jewish critique of politics, culture, and society. And he says, why does it have to be a Jewish critique, right? Why couldn't it be a Gentile critique? Why does it have to be why couldn't it be a magazine with articles written by human beings for other human beings to read? And then he goes off to talk about, why we don't have, for example, Presbyterian Field and Stream, or things like that. But the only reason he says that Jewishness figures in his movies at all is because of he is an artist, he is an auteur, he writes from where he comes and who he's familiar with, and he comes from a Jewish background, he never denies that, and this is what he knows. He says, of course, and I want to emphasize that, of course, he says, any character I play would be Jewish just because I'm Jewish. Right now, we might take issue with that as sort of against the definition of acting, but this is what he says, and he argues that in fact the reason that critics call attention to his films as Jewish is because, he says, you can have 600 jokes in your film, and if 2 of the gags are Jewish, the picture will be perceived as a Jewish comedy. That it's our disproportionate attention to the Jewishness in his films and as opposed to the Jewishness in them as well. As you can imagine, I don't actually believe that, right? The artist has the right to say what he wants about his work, and the critics have the right to disagree with him. And if I didn't, we still have a little bit of time left, and there's this, these clips. So I think that that there is this idea that he has, right? That he feels himself not to be a Jewish filmmaker, and he compares himself, the final thing I want to say before I show the first clip, is that when he talks about Philip Roth, who he considers to be a real Jewish writer, and he says he's brilliant, he admires him tremendously, he says, I don't have the same Jewish preoccupation he does. He says, the reason why I'm not dealing with Jewishness, I am a comedian, and doing comedy for a live audience, I use the Jewish preoccupation for a fast, amusing score. Again, the same kind of thing, right? For me, it's just like a comic using a buzzword to score quick laughs. And in the first clips that I'm going to show you, which are from early in his career, from Take the Money and Run, and Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask, you can basically see this strategy being used. Alan is just throwing a bunch of things against the wall, and it seems that Jewishness appears simply as a means of being funny. So let's see how that works out for him. Okay.
We need volunteers for an experiment. The doctors want someone to be inoculated with a new vaccine. It's never been tried on humans before, so we don't know what the side effects may be. To be honest, you'll be taking a chance. As reward, there's a parole. I'm sure there are some among you brave enough to take the risk.
With parole as inducement, Virgil submits to the vaccine test. It is a success, except for one temporary side effect. For several hours, he is turned into a rabbi.
And so, the reason we celebrate the Passover holidays by eating matzot is to commemorate the time that Moses led the children of Israel from Egypt.
And now it's with a great deal of pleasure that I present this week's winner. Ladies and gentlemen, and members of the panel, here from Muncie, Indiana is our winner, Rabbi Chaim
From a parody
Baumel.
of Chaim Baumel, from a parody of game shows called What's My Fetish?
Well, congratulations to you, Chaim Baumel.
Excuse me. It's not shame. It's not came. It's pronounced Chaim.
Chaim. Very good. I understand in addition to being a very distinguished clergyman, you have a very, very fascinating fetish.
You mean a hang-up?
Yes.
Yes. Silk stockings.
Silk stockings.
I love silk stockings. To touch them, to hug them, to.
Now, you wrote in your letter that what you'd like is to be tied up. For this, we need the help of one of the members of the panel. How about someone to tie him up? Regis Philbin, would you?
Excuse me. Must be a girl.
Girl. All right, well, we certainly have two lovely girls. Pamela, would you do the honors and tie up the rabbi?
Okay, I'm going to stop that there. But why? Why not? But suffice it, you should, if you want, you should rent the movie. But suffice it to say, as some of you know, the clip goes on, right, and eventually, right, he is tied up. Someone is spanking him and saying, "Naughty rabbi," and his wife is sitting at his feet and eating pork while all of this is going on. And I think it's fair to say that while these are funny, they are not, in some sense, strictly relevant to the plot as they are. They are just sort of throwaways, and they are aimed, therefore, at a universal audience and just sort of a general marker of vague kind of Jewishness. And the proof of this, I think, is Woody Allen's portrayal of that rabbi in Take the Money and Run, right, that he is turned into as a side effect, where he looks like an ultra-Orthodox rabbi, I think it's fair to say. But if the hands are the hands of an ultra-Orthodox rabbi, so to speak, the voice is the voice of a general clergyman, a reform clergyman of the 1950s, right, who is speaking about Passover and Matzoth, as he puts it. And there is that interesting thing where he wants to have those kind of dulcet tones of a general thing. So in some sense, that I think is less specific, and it proves at a very early period Allen's thesis of saying, look, the reason that I'm doing this is just because it's funny. But you might ask me, if I allowed you time for questions, you might ask me, what about his persona itself? I mean, isn't that very Jewish? Isn't that the most basic idea of what Woody Allen is doing Jewish humor, specifically Jewish humor, is this kind of Schlemiel-like figure, this very simple, nebbish, this thing like that. And I want to point out first, again, that Allen is not like his persona. And if we were really doing a lecture on Woody Allen just as a person, we would spend a lot more time on this. But Allen also claims that he is not doing this because it is a Jewish figure. In fact, he claims that in a 1977 interview, right around the time of Annie Hall, that he never set out to create any kind of image at all when he started as a comedian. He just did jokes he thought was funny. And that he says that it seemed like a very standard film persona for a comedian. Someone who is, there's a quote from him, someone who is a physical coward, who lusts after women, who is good-hearted but ineffectual, clumsy, nervous, all standard things you've seen in various disguises. Charlie Chaplin, W.C. Fields, Groucho Marx, or, and a personal favorite of his, Bob Hope, right, who is, his two, in some sense, guiding lights are really Groucho Marx and Bob Hope. But this said, I think, again, we are free to take Allen as being a little bit disingenuous here, and to say that he is, in the process of creating this figure, right, creating somebody who is very much separate from the rest of the world as a whole around him, and someone who is separate both in time and in space in a particularly Jewish way. And to explain that, I'm going to show you one clip from the very distant past of Woody Allen, and two clips from a movie set in the very distant future. First clip from Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex, in the section called What is an Aphrodisiac? The second clip's from, not surprisingly, from Sleeper. So let's see if we can get this to work. Hold on.
Good evening, Your Majesty.
Majesty. It's great to be back here at the palace. You know what the palace is? That's 24 living rooms and a dungeon. But seriously, I love the king. He's one of the strongest men here, isn't he? He's the only one amongst us that can swim the moat lengthwise. I know you're out there. I can hear you breathing. But seriously, ladies and germs, I want to say that that plague is really something, isn't it? Doesn't everything look black? Of course, it's a black plague. Save it up and let me hear it at the end, big. And I love the new exercise His Majesty does to keep in shape. It's called taxing the peasants. But seriously, the best thing that...
I can't stand it any longer. He's not funny. I've cut men in half for making jokes as bad as that.
But sire...
Get me a fool who's funny! On, the feast is over. Not funny. Go on, out.
Anybody here? I have a new citizen to be outfitted.
Brother, you want jackets? We got jackets. You want trousers? We got trousers. This is a good time, believe me. We're having a big sale, tremendous. Positively the lowest prices. Maybe you need a nice double knit. Incidentally, I'm stuck with 3 pieces corduroy.
Something simple.
We got simple, we got complicated. What are you worrying?
Who put away that shipment downstairs?
What are you bothering me? I got a customer.
You know what the hell you're doing. That was all velvet.
So it's velvet. Leave me alone. I got a customer.
Just look
Why
at the
do we
noses.
need so much velvet?
What?
Where do we come to velvet?
I'll talk to you later.
Look, I'm in a little bit of a rush here, if it's okay.
Talk to me now. You know what your mistakes are costing us?
Drop dead. You want to drop dead? Okay, step against the screen.
This is terrible.
Okay, we'll take it in.
Now listen to me, Miles. It's the year 1962. It's time for that Sunday dinner at your parents' house. Your parents' house in Brooklyn on K Avenue.
No, what are you standing there? Come in. Your food is getting cold.
Let's eat.
Miles, take some peas. Soon the Passover holidays are coming and you'll be wanting to wear your matzahs.
No, I got something to tell you. Arlene and I have to get a divorce. She thinks I'm a pervert because I drank our waterbed.
Oi, bae, I smear.
Oi, Gewalt, what will them goyim say?
No.
Stop whining and eat your shiksa.
Oh, no. No, please. Don't let in the light. Oh, cover those lights, please. Please, don't get up. I was just passing through.
And we find out at the end that he is channeling, of course, Blanche Dubois. As it comes out. But I think you can see, both from the past and future, that one of the things that Alan is doing is essentially claiming that he is different from all of the society around him. And on the one hand, that's the province of the comedian, right? To sort of stand aside and say, here, I'm different from everybody else. I'm looking, I'm observing. But the ways in which he's different seem implicitly and explicitly in these clips to be very much about being Jewish. Right? In the first one, you have this Borscht Belt comic routine, right? This very Jewish comedian going up in front of the power structure of the world, which is, of course, these very British kings and queens and princes and what have you. And at the end, they deliver their verdict. Not funny, right? They come, right? Because they're all these sort of strapping physical specimens. You have this very tiny sort of little Jewish guy. And then, of course, we get to the future where literally the Jew only exists as a human being, right, as opposed to these sort of robot tailors, in the form of this sleeper who has been cryogenically frozen for hundreds of years. And they have to kind of hilariously try and recapitulate what they think his childhood is like in order to kind of shock him back to existence. And to do so, to kind of create this kind of brew of neuroses, which leads to this sort of hilariously mistaken thing. With, of course, that phrase, "Go ahead, eat your shiksa," which, you know, I'm amazed that, well, I'm not actually amazed that got past the censors, because I'm sure they had no idea what was going on. Anyway, but I think, you know, if in fact we are able to argue that for Woody Allen there is some kind of outsiderness in America, right, that is inextricably linked to his sense of Jewishness, it would also be fair to say that it's linked to a lot more than that, and that his preoccupation with this, somehow this Jewish essence, is linked to his preoccupations with his other things as well, right? That is to say that childhood, right, which is a archetypally Jewish childhood that's sort of recreated in Sleeper, leads to a whole series of neuroses, right? And neuroses that become the creative preoccupations of much of his later work. I think it's fair enough to say that Woody Allen has made a good living out of psychoanalysis, in much the same way that psychoanalysis has made a good living out of Woody Allen. And he, you know, sex and death, right, with these preoccupations of Freudian analysis. And of course, his very early, one of his very early successful lines was that he said, you know, he wanted to kill himself, but he was in strict Freudian analysis, and they make you pay for the sessions you miss. And let's just see, I'm going to take a couple of maybe less common clips that represent this preoccupation of sex, of death. They are from, respectively, Deconstructing Harry and New York Stories, right? Deconstructing Harry, the first clip, all you need to know is that the Woody Allen character has hired a prostitute, but has done so under the name of his friend Mendel Birnbaum, and he is sort of renting his bachelor pad. For the second one, all you need to know is his mother has just died.
Did you enjoy it?
Are you kidding me? I will be right back.
Where are you going?
I'm gonna go check my pants and see if I can find another 50. I'd like to go again.
Tall and tan and young, the girl from Ipanema goes walking, and when she passes, he smiles, but she doesn't see.
Yes?
Mendel Birnbaum.
Yes?
Open.
Who is it?
Mendel Birnbaum.
Who are you?
I've come for you.
What are you talking about?
I'm deaf, and your name is on my list.
No. Wait a minute. You made a mistake.
You don't have a minute.
No, see, I'm not Mendel Birnbaum.
Don't give me that bullshit. Look at your monogram.
Mendel? Who are you talking to?
No, stop calling me Mendel, please. I'm just using his pad.
Right. They always have an excuse. Let's go. Move it, you little putz.
From New York Stories, the section Oedipus Rex.
The next corner. You're going the long way.
Mom, I know how to drive to the cemetery.
Yeah, you know. And slow up. You have to speed.
I'm doing 30 miles.
Listen, if you're gonna be nasty, I'm not going.
So, I think it's fair to say that he's got some issues that he's working out, and that those issues are all tied together, right, with the idea that he's not right with the world, right? He feels sort of separate. He feels like he's not able to sort of adjust to these the way the universe actually works. His sexual life is, a catalog of dysfunction. He can't deal with his encroaching mortality, right? Which, by the way, was a process apparently that started when he was 6. He was unable to, he just would sleep in his bed at night, or not be able to go to sleep in his bed at night, and just worry about what will happen when I die, which is, I think, not a normal thing for a 6-year-old to be thinking about every night. And ultimately, all of this adjustment, this failure to adjust, seems to be connected in his work to the idea of the Jew in America also as being unable to adjust. Someone who is not necessarily quite right, who wants to be part of this normal society, but doesn't quite fit in. And all of this, psychoanalysis, issues of assimilation on a national and personal level, and frustrations with sort of not being the person who you want to be, all come to a head, I think, in what is clearly the most interesting movie from the perspective of Woody Allen as an American Jewish filmmaker, and that movie is Zelig. So in Zelig, if you recall, Zelig, the human chameleon, and the man who is able, somehow miraculously, to look like anybody else who is around him. And one of the things that Woody Allen did was have a number of talking heads begin to speak a little bit about how problematic that was and what Zelig really meant. So let's look at that.
Oh, his taste wasn't terrible. He was the kind of man who preferred watching baseball to reading Moby Dick. And that got him off on the wrong foot, or so the legend goes. It was much more a matter of symbolism. To the Marxist, he was one thing. The Catholic Church never forgave him for the Vatican incident. The American people, in the throes of the Depression as they were, found in him a symbol of possibility, of self-improvement and self-fulfillment. And of course, the Freudians had a ball. They could interpret him in any way they pleased. It was all symbolism. But there were no two intellectuals who agreed about what it meant.
I don't know if you could call it a triumph of psychotherapy. It seems more like a triumph of aesthetic instincts, because Dr. Fletcher's techniques didn't know anything to then current schools of therapy, but she sensed what was needed and she provided it. And that was in its way a remarkable creative accomplishment.
When I think about it, it seems to me that his story reflected a lot of the Jewish experience in America, the great urge to push in and to find one's place and then to assimilate into the culture. I mean, he wanted to assimilate like crazy.
Leonard Zillig, do you want to give the kids of this country some advice?
I sure do. Kids, you gotta be yourself. You can't act like anybody else just because you think that they have all the answers and you don't. You have to be your own man and learn to speak up and say what's on your mind. Now, maybe they're not free to do that in foreign countries, but that's the American way.
And if you recall, at the end of the movie, Zelig, right, who has a sort of backlash from that moment, joins sort of the ultimate group of joiners, the ultimate people who are all assimilated into just like everyone else, who are the Germans, the Nazi Germans at this particular point. And you see Woody Allen's preoccupation, for example, with the Holocaust coming out there as well, which is something that we will get back to. But it becomes an impossible solution for Woody Allen to champion what he did in that last clip there. That is to say, I am unique, I am my own person, right? But I am also adjusted. I'm also just like everybody else. That's what Zelig is saying. But it's not something Woody Allen himself was ever able to master. And so the question then is, taking Woody Allen's inability or struggling with this, is there some possibility of having a kind of American Jewish identity which is comfortably Jewish, right, in an age where what is very important is for him to be an American as well? And in order to start that, I want to look at his most personal exposition of the problem, right, which is Annie Hall, and these very quick lines from that movie.
The other important joke for me is one that's usually attributed to Groucho Marx, but I think it appears originally in Freud's Wit and its relation to the unconscious. And it goes like this, I'm paraphrasing. I would never want to belong to any club that would have someone like me for a member.
You're You're like New York City. You're just this person. You're like this island unto yourself.
Okay. Sorry for the abruptness of those clips there, but I think that you're beginning to see sort of the problem and at least Woody Allen's first glimmerings towards a solution. And our solution about questions of how is American Jewish identity shaped and reflected through Woody Allen, right? So again, the question is, here is this guy, he's all alone, right? He's his own island, he's unassimilable, right? That is in some sense a stand-in in the argument that we're making for the American Jewish experience as a whole, right? That, you know, it's different from everybody else. And that Annie Hall, who is, as is shown over and over again, the non-Jewish woman par excellence, right? The symbol of non-Jewishness, ultimately ends up breaking up with him. Right? I hope I'm not I'm sure everybody in this audience has seen Woody Allen, has seen Annie Hall, excuse me. And so as a result, what is the solution? Well, one first solution is to say, well, there actually is an area that is in, but perhaps not of, America, that is very much a place where Woody Allen feels at home. A place which can be sort of Jewish and not Jewish at the same time, that he can feel comfortable in. And that place is, of course, New York, or more specifically, Manhattan. And there's a very interesting line of Woody Allen in one of his interviews where he says, "Sometimes I get to thinking New York is America, but that is wrong. Once I was in the suburbs and I drove by one of those theaters with about 8 movies playing at once, and I almost couldn't imagine one of my films playing there." But from a very early period, as you'll see, Allen is very much identifying New York as a kind of Jewish place. This is from Bananas.
Fielding Mellish, the president of San Marcos, goes on trial tomorrow for fraud, inciting to riot, conspiracy to overthrow the government, and using the word thighs in mixed company.
Please rise. Court is now in session. Judge Seymour Watson presiding. The People versus Fielding Mellish.
I object, Your Honor. This trial is a travesty. It's a travesty of a mockery, of a sham, of a mockery, of a travesty, of 2 mockeries, of a sham. I move for a mistrial. You realize there's not a single homosexual on that jury?
Yes, there is.
Oh, really? Which one? Is it the big guy at the end?
Call the first witness. And you remember Fielding Mellish.
He's got a record. He was always being picked up at one demonstration or another. He's a bad apple, a commie. A New York Jewish intellectual communist crackpot. I mean, I don't want to cast no aspersions.
Max, my service can send you to the showers early.
Right. So to get back to what we're discussing, the failure of the country to get behind New York City is anti-Semitism.
Max, the city is terribly run.
But I'm not discussing politics or economics. This is foreskin.
No, Max. That's a very convenient out. Every time some group disagrees with you, it's because of anti-Semitism.
Don't you see the rest of the country looks upon New York like we're left-wing communist, Jewish, homosexual pornographers? I think of us that way sometimes, and I live here.
Max, if we lived in California, we could play outdoors every day in the sun.
Sun is bad for you. Everything our parents said was good is bad. Sun, milk, red meat, college.
People in Manhattan who were constantly creating these real unnecessary neurotic problems for themselves because it keeps them from dealing with more unsolvable, terrifying problems about the universe. Well, it has to be optimistic. All right, why is life?
Okay, I'm going to stop that part there. He goes on then to say, why is life worth living, and has that very famous list of things that are wonderful about Manhattan. But for now, I just want to point out that Manhattan becomes a place, or New York becomes a place that is both very much a home for him, right? That is, it's a place that he identifies with, that he feels comfortable in. And we've just established over the first part of this that Woody Allen is not a man who feels comfortable with the world, right? But at the same time, he is aware that it's not actually America, right? The rest of the world looks at it as this place which is full of all of these various things. And that, in fact, even internally, Manhattan is unhealthy, right? Because it becomes the place where all of these neurotic people, read Jews, come to create a series of neuroses that make them even worse. So in some sense, to at least have a comfortable solution for what a Jewish American identity is, New Yorkishness, right, although it may be identified with Jewishness, is not sufficient, right? Both because it isn't really part of America, right? It's its own sort of little island, metaphorically as well. And also, it doesn't really support, right? It just sort of creates greater neuroses. So the question then is there any kind of positive vision in Woody Allen of Jewishness, of a kind of Jewish American identity? And how does this search, right, that I'm going to try and argue in the rest of the clips, fit in with the search for a Jewish identity among American Jews in an age beyond religion, right? Woody Allen, obviously not a religious guy, right? None of his films are about him as a religious person or are created by him as a religious person. And as a result, what is the role of American Jewish identity in a post-religious age? So New Yorkishness doesn't seem to work. Maybe family or ethnic traditions or cultural traditions. Well, let's take a look at that, if I can figure out where we are. Okay. These are clips, again, from Annie Hall and then from one of his more autobiographical movies, right, Radio Days, which itself, very sweet movie, right, which has a sort of loving look at what his life was like when he was growing up.
I can't believe this family. Annie's mother is really beautiful. And they're talking swap meets and boat basins, and the old lady at the end of the table is a classic Jew hater. And they really look American, you know, very healthy. They're like they never get sick or anything. Nothing like my family. You know, the two are like oil and water.
Let him drop dead. Who needs his business?
His wife has diabetes.
Diabetes?
Jack Adams
is that
is
an
the new
excuse,
president.
diabetes?
Let me tell you,
A man is
something
50
else.
years old and doesn't have a substantial job.
Oh, yes, that's right.
What are you talking about? You know what you're talking about?
Sure, defend him.
Oh, you remember her?
Yeah,
We're in 4-H. Mo Moscow, he had a coronary.
How do you plan to spend the holidays, Mrs. Singer? We fast.
Fast? You know, no food. You know, to atone for our sins.
What sins? I don't understand.
Tell you the truth, neither do we.
It's terrible. They have no respect.
They should be thrown out of the neighborhood.
Disgrace.
My nerves on edge because I'm so hungry.
You think they fast? They don't care about the high holidays. They eat even though you're supposed to fast.
Grandma can't stand the radio next door.
It's awful. It's just awful.
Wait a minute, Dad, I don't understand. I thought that you're allowed to turn it on.
No, for 24 hours you're supposed to do nothing. You can't even turn on a light switch. Just sit and fast and pray and atone for your sins.
Well, how come they're not?
Well, what do they care? They're communists.
That's right. They don't believe in religion. Abe, go speak to them.
What, you want me to talk to them? I'd like to burn their house down, but I'm not allowed to light matches today.
If they don't believe it themselves, at least they should do it out of respect for the neighbors. It's terrible. They're Jewish, but they don't believe in God, just Stalin.
Well, I'm just going to go tell them a few things, that's all. Hey, listen. What the hell are you doing? Turn off the radio. We're praying in there. Yes!
Next week, we are going to issue collection boxes. And each of you will be asked to go out in the street and collect funds for the promotion of a new state in Palestine.
Hey, can you give to the Jewish National Fund and help us build a homeland in Palestine? Please? No? Hey, how about you? Can you give to the Jewish National Fund? Can you help us build anything? Hey, how about... All right. Can you? No. Give to the Jewish National Fund? Hey, can you give to... Hey, excuse me. Can you give to me, please? Thank you. Guys, we got enough here to get the Master Avenger rings and an ice cream soda. We gotta leave some for Palestine. Why should we leave anything for Palestine? It's all the way over in Egypt. This is a sin. What if the rabbi catches us? Hey, he'll never find out. Besides, I can handle him. You sure? Positive. Dimes. I got 4 dimes.
Monies for that Jewish homeland used to buy this masked adventure ring? My heart is full of grief. It swells with anguish.
He'll pay back every cent.
Yep.
Shut up.
I don't know what to do, Rabbi. Every night he listens to the radio. I can't keep him away. I say go to the beach, play in the sun, get some fresh air. No. The Lone Ranger, the Shadow, the Masked Avenger.
This is not good. This boy needs discipline. Radio. It's all right once in a while. Otherwise, It tends to induce bad values, false dreams, lazy habits. Listening to the radio, these stories of foolishness and violence, this is no way for a boy to grow up.
You speak the truth, my faithful Indian companion.
So I think you guys have correctly intuited who gets the best of that scene there, right? Which again speaks volumes about the way in which ethnic and religious traditions, right, the values, the positive values that American Jewish identity one might have hoped or one might have thought would be grounded on, right, are not present in a lot of these places. Think about the first Singer family in Annie Hall, right, who are fasting on Yom Kippur, right? They're saying this is what they do on the holiday, but they have no idea why they're fasting, right? Well, we don't know either, right? We don't understand it. In that Radio Days clip, right, they're sitting around, they come over, they say, we're praying at the end of this, when of course they're not. They're just sitting, they're seething, they don't understand why they're not able to have fun like the communists next door. And then ultimately, right, in this final scene, certainly both Hebrew school and Israel, right, these two values, Jewish education and Israel, are both considered much less interesting, important, vital, and vibrant than the radio, than the excitement and the adventure of the radio. And there's a way in which one might have said that this is simply children's high spirits, except for the fact that the movie is not called JNF Tzedakah Box Days, right? It's called Radio Days. And clearly we are meant to view on the side of how magical, in fact, this is. So, but that, of course, is not the only argument that is made in American Jewish life in this period, or that Woody Allen takes up for the maintenance of a Jewish identity in America. There is not only positive structures, but there are negative ones too, right? How about the specter of anti-Semitism, right? We've already seen in many of these clips that sort of, here and there about anti-Semitism. In that same Tikkun article, Allen recognizes this idea. He says, one day I may have to fight because I'm a Jew or even die because of it, and no amount of professed apathy to religion will save me. This is at least a claim that he seems to hear. And I just want to play some clips for you to show how he discusses this from both first Deconstructing Harry, where Allen's character, Harry, goes up to visit on the way to get an honorary degree, he goes up with a prostitute in tow to visit his sister, who has become an extremely Orthodox Jew. And then subsequently at a cocktail party in Manhattan. Okay, so here are these three quick clips.
Boy, you're the last person in the world I ever expected to see.
Oh, don't say that, Doris.
Yeah. And what's with Cookie?
Cookie's the nanny.
The nanny? What, did you get her from an agency or a massage parlor?
Oh, Jesus, she's a sweet kid. What are you picking?
Still with the sex pops, the tramps, the veiled Hayats.
She's got a PhD, this girl.
Really? I don't know how she did on her written, but I'm sure she got an A+ on her oral exam.
Hey, give me a break, will you? I'm driving upstate. I take the time to drop in to say hello. Can you believe that they're honoring me at a dare? I can't believe it. Not that I care, but it's great for Hilly, I think, to see me.
You know, the last time I saw him, he was 6 years old.
Well, you don't exactly contact me either.
Well, I know what you think of me.
Oh, please, Doris, don't start in.
But what, am I wrong? It's all over your book. Jewish, too Jewish, professionally Jewish. Of course, you attributed it all to your ex-wife, Joan, but you gave her the details of my life because you wanted to depict her with contempt.
Oh, I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, you don't know what I'm talking about? You made a picture of your ex as a horror, and in order to make that picture unsympathetic and unappetizing, yes, you used some of her, but mostly, you caricatured my religious dedication.
Oh, Jesus,
yeah, because it has always enraged you that I return to my roots.
What roots? You were a wonderful, sweet kid. You got me through my childhood, and then you go away to Fort Lauderdale and you meet this fanatic, this zealot, and he fills you full of superstition.
It's tradition.
Tradition is the illusion of permanence.
You have no values. Your whole life, it's nihilism, it's cynicism, it's sarcasm and orgasm.
Yeah, in France, I could run on that slogan and win.
I'm a Jew. I was born a Jew. What, do you hate me because of that?
What? And if our parents converted to Catholicism a month before you were born, we'd be Catholics, and that would be the end of it. They're clubs. They're exclusionary, all of them. They foster the concept of the other, so you know clearly who you should hate. And
would you? That's enough.
Let me ask you a question. If a Jew gets massacred, does that bother you more than if a Gentile gets hurt, or a black, or a Bosnian?
Yes, it does. It does. I can't help it. It's my people.
They're all your people.
You know what? Bert is right about you. You're a self-hating Jew.
Hey, I may hate myself, but not because I'm Jewish. Here he is, direct from the Wailing Wall.
Disrespectful, shameful. The Jews haven't suffered enough without being depicted by this one as homicidal cannibals.
Well, he has no spiritual center. He's betting everything on physics and pussy. Well, if you'll excuse the expression.
Do you mind?
Yeah, Whaley gets cancer. He'll be the first one in synagogue sitting in the front row in a yarmulke.
Why should I get cancer? I eat broccoli, I do everything right.
Do you care even about the Holocaust? Or do you think it never happened?
Not only do I know that we lost 6 million, but the scary thing is that records are made to be broken, I mean, I know what's out there. Do you have any idea?
He creates offensive Jewish stereotypes like in Der Stürmer.
Yes, Max is a version of Daddy. A man you hated, a man you think committed the crime of being a terrible parent.
Well, he was a terrible parent.
Thank you for dropping by. Please come again in another 4 years.
Hey, look, wouldn't it be a better world if not every group thought they had a direct line to God?
He thinks I'm all Jewish, paranoia.
No, I don't think you're paranoid. I think you're the opposite of a paranoid. I think you go around with the insane delusion that people like you. What are you doing here? Congratulations on your book. I thought it was terrific. Absolutely terrific.
Thanks.
Nice to see you.
Listen, good people, I'd like you to meet my friend Isaac Davis.
Hi, how do you do? Isaac Davis. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, what are you doing here?
Well, I'm here. Of course I'm here.
What a funny coincidence. Oh, excuse me, Isaac Davis. Hey, we met before. We know one another.
I'm sorry.
No, sorry.
I heard you quit your job.
Yeah, real self-destructive impulse. I want to write a book, so I. Has anybody read that Nazis are going to march in New Jersey? I read this in the newspaper. We should go down there, get some guys together, get some bricks and baseball bats, and really explain things to them.
There is this devastating satirical piece on that on the op-ed page of the Times. It is devastating.
Well, a satirical piece in the Times is one thing, but bricks and baseball bats really gets right to the point.
So, I think that last one was from Manhattan. And in fact, Alan will often sort of cite this last clip to say, in fact, if you look at this, you remember that he really he takes this very seriously, and yet in those first two clips from Deconstructing Harry, we see how complicated the argument is. And remember, of course, that Alan is playing a man who, in the original title of Deconstructing Harry, was referred to as the most hated man in the world. And second, that Alan is writing both sides of the conversation, right, even though he is only acting one of them. And that we see, on the one hand, some of his, the things we saw at the very beginning of saying, look, Jewish identity, it really is, like every religious identity, it's very divisive and what have you. But he does sort of give a full time to this idea that there is some reality to the fact that people don't like him, don't like Jews simply because they're Jews. But to him, that is not a sufficient reason to remain Jewish. And in fact, the problem of the Holocaust is to him as he says, records are made to be broken. And he doesn't really mean necessarily about Jews, but simply that this is a particular case of the general problem of evil, right? And here is where we finally get to the question that obviously makes Woody Allen into one of the big thinkers on film, as well as just sort of a great comedian. And that is, how is it that he deals with these philosophical questions, right? That human beings aren't necessarily good at heart, that there is necessarily no loving God in the universe. How is it that one tends to go on? And there is a movie, or I should say before that because of his Jewish background, he does turn to the Jewish tradition, and specifically to the Jewish tradition, to work out his answers to this, even as at the same time he finds those answers wanting. And in the final movie that I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to show you some clips from, it is a movie which presses these questions most seriously and deals with the treatments in a most sustained way. And that movie is, I think, one of his best movies, Crimes and Misdemeanors, right? In which, as many of you remember, right, the man who we're going to see first, Judah Rosenthal, right, is a very well-respected and very famous ophthalmologist who murders his mistress when she threatens to expose him. And basically, it's clear that if he chooses to, he can get away with it. That's, I think, all that we need to know to see these last clips, except for that the final clip is by a philosopher, a real rabbi philosopher who Woody Allen's character, who is a documentary filmmaker, wants to make a documentary of. This is the sort of second plot, the misdemeanor plot to Judah Rosenthal, Martin Landau's Crimes plot. Okay? Here we go.
That the new ophthalmology wing has become a reality is not just a tribute to me, but to a spirit of community, generosity, of mutual caring, and answered prayers. Now, it's funny I use the term answered prayers. You see, I'm a man of science. I've always been a skeptic, but I was raised quite religiously. And while I challenged it, even as a child, some of that feeling must have stuck with me. I remember my father telling me, the eyes of God are on us always. The eyes of God. What a phrase to a young boy. I mean, what were God's eyes like? Unimaginably penetrating, intense eyes, I assumed. And I wonder if it was just a coincidence that I made my specialty ophthalmology.
You know, I'm actually, because we're running short on time, and this basically repeats some of the things we've talked about, I'm going to stop it there. That's a good place to stop. That the eyes of God are on us all. And of course, the movie itself is dedicated to the idea, as comes out in this conversation. I recommend you're just watching it, renting the movie again if you haven't seen it in a long time, or renting it, watching this conversation at a Passover Seder, and a final conversation about the Akedah, that is to say, about the binding of Isaac, right, where ultimately, in all of these cases, Alan is exploring the proof that, in fact, the eyes of God aren't on us all. And yet, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with a kind of cold reality where none of the answers that tradition has seemed to suggest are at all helpful, right? That all we have is the world that we're in. And Alan, again, if we were talking about him more generally, we would say that Alan often in his movies, because they are, of course, movies, suggests magic and fantasy as possibilities to escape, right? As comedy to escape. But in his great movies, he reminds us that we can't sort of rely on this. If you recall in The Purple Rose of Cairo, for example, one of the few movies that Alan considers an unqualified success of his. He doesn't like most of his work, but he likes The Purple Rose of Cairo. He says that Mia Farrow's character has to choose between reality and fantasy. If you recall in the movie, a movie character, steps off onto the screen and wants to sort of romance this girl. And she can't live in fantasy. She has to live in reality, and so she rejects him with tragic consequences. But that this struggle is something that is very much, right, that one has to come to terms with reality. And as he put it himself in one of his great lines in his writings, he says, I think what it boils down to really is that I hate reality, but, you know, unfortunately, it's the only place where you can get a good steak dinner. And that really is, I think, the answer, the only answer that we can give. That is to say, that just in the same way that Judah Rosenthal struggles with these moral questions in Jewish terms at the Passover Seder and with the visions of his father in synagogue, that Woody Allen's ideas of taking these grand metaphysical things and cutting them down into the comic vision of a steak dinner is a strategy which archetypally is defined as personally Jewish. That this idea of taking the metaphysics and referring to it in these kind of homey comic Jewish ways is something that he borrows not only from Groucho Marx, but from Shalom Aleichem before him, from the Tevye characters, As you know, I'm a professor of Yiddish literature, so I have to work. It's contractually obligated for me to work in Shalom Aleichem to any lecture I give. But that Woody Allen truly is someone who, in his balancing of high and low, right, who is in his balancing of a Jewish tradition with the dissatisfaction and the angriness and the unhappiness with that tradition, is in some sense the very apotheosis of what an American Jewish creative talent is today. So with that, I'm going to stop lecturing and say thank you very much. We still have about 5-10 minutes for questions or comments or complaints. If anything, if anyone wants to say anything, please, sir, right here. Yep. Right. I think that's absolutely right, and I think that that's one of the reasons that these movies become such an interesting opportunity for us to talk about what American Jewish identity is, in this period. Because, as you say, he is very mindful of the fact that one of his audiences, his major American audience, is, in fact, as you say, a secular Jewish, largely cosmopolitan urban audience. I just will say the caveat is that, in fact, Allen doesn't necessarily always see it that way because he is very mindful of his huge successes in Europe. And that if you look at the grosses internationally, he has often said that his movies make more money in Paris than they do in the United States as a whole. Which is why I thought it was very funny. Some of you have seen the movie Hollywood Ending. And for those of you who have not, I will not ruin it for you. Suffice it to say that it relies on knowing that Woody Allen is extremely well respected in France. And that there, of course, he is not aiming for a Jewish audience, but he's aiming for an audience of cosmopolitan individuals, largely secular, who have within them an incredibly long religious, although of course not Jewish, religious tradition. You just walk through the streets of any major European capital and, the churches loom on you. And this is something I think that, as I've been trying to suggest to you, Allen is saying, well, when you no longer can believe in a tradition that is founded on religion, as Judaism certainly is, and yet this is what you have, where do you go? So I think that that's one of the reasons why, Europe is resonant to him. Please, and then you.
Good lecture. A lot of fun. Except, we're talking about a secular person.
Yeah.
Jewishness, perhaps 5% of his entire brilliant work that he's done.
Right.
Here, maybe 95% of his work.
Right.
And he missed a lot.
Right. As I had said, you're absolutely right about that. As I had said at the beginning, this is part of a series on Jewish American filmmakers and looking at it from that perspective. If we were doing a different perspective on these as filmmakers, this would be an entirely different lecture. And you're absolutely right. We would put it in a different way. If we were saying, if this were inside the actor's studio, for example, we were talking about him as an actor, we would do an entirely different lecture. But this is the one I picked to do. You can militate to the rabbi in the back to say we want different lectures next time. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that one of the things that is pressing for him, right, is to say, in a traditional moral universe, that is a universe where there's some kind of higher power, you can't get away with murder. Maybe you can get away here with murder, but you really ultimately can't get away with things. But that the challenge is, what happens in the kind of universe that Allen believes himself to be, and where the proof of the fact that there's no higher power is that it seems like you can get away with things. And in this sense, right, Allen, as you know, is mad on the Russians, as we might have said. He's a big fan of Russian literature. And, one of the things about Dostoevsky, who he is certainly enamored of to a certain extent, right, is that in fact, you can't get away with it, right? That even if there is no God, right, all is not permitted because your own morality sort of hobbles you and constrains you. This is Crime and Punishment. This is not, Allen is much more, let's say, cynical about things, right? He's not clear, even though Judah Rosenthal is not an extraordinary man, he can still get away perhaps with this. And I think that if in Alan's interviews, the movie is left ambiguous, but Alan's interviews remove the ambiguity of what he believes Rosenthal will do. In Match Point, it's not ambiguous, right? But in other words, there won't be a moment where either in Match Point or here, according to Alan, right, that the characters 20 years from now will say, "Oh my God, I have to go turn myself in because I can't stand it anymore," and that becomes a much greater challenge, right? Okay, someone all the way in the back. Yes, you. I'll repeat the question. Right. Right. I think that's a good question, and I think that the question, which I will repeat because it is a good question, and I said that I would, that Alan is of a very particular generation. He was born right before World War II, but really came of intellectual maturity immediately in the post-war period. But of course, he is now quite old, as we know from the increasing incongruity of the women that he is romantically paired with on screen, and off screen as well. But what happens? Well, who is a 30-year-old person now? And I will say this in response to that: it would be very difficult to find someone who is explicitly like Alan, but one candidate, not in the way that he makes movies, but as an American Jewish filmmaker, is Darren Aronofsky, who is a much younger filmmaker. I think he's probably in his late 30s now. And his first movie, Pi, which I don't know whether any of you have seen, which came out in the late 90s, is very explicitly and learnedly Jewish. That is to say, it really features sort of Kabbalah, but not in a kind of frothy pop way, but in a kind of deep-seated narrative way. And that this is, let's say, resonant of an increasing interest of Jewish creative artists with learned encounters with Jewish text. That hasn't made it so hugely into the film world as yet, but remember, Woody Allen is certainly in the later period of his career, one voice. He is not stand for the mainstream, and I'm not suggesting that he does. Yeah. What about with the neuroses? I think that it's a good question. Who is a particularly neurotic Jewish filmmaker? Anybody have any suggestions? I'm happy to take it. Yeah. Okay. With Larry David. Right. Okay, I think that's a great way to go, is to say, thank you for getting me out of a tight spot. I appreciate that. Yes, I mean, it's certainly the case that many of the auteurs, right, the people who want creative control over their work, have left the precincts of movies and gone to television. That's no question. And David, who is certainly younger than Alan, and Seinfeld are individuals who themselves are expressing a kind of neurotic Jewish presence. God knows Larry David is not a well-adjusted individual, at least certainly not the character that he plays. I've never met the man. Please, yes, and then you, ma'am. Yeah. Okay, Barry Levinson, I think you mean. Yes, Ira Levin, a great writer. Barry Levinson, a great filmmaker. And you're right. There was only room for four, but if you talk to them, we can work something out. We'll see what happens. Please. And then I think I missed someone over here who I called. Yeah. Right. Oh, absolutely. I think that's right. Yeah. Right. Right. No, I think that you're right to say that this is, again, accentuating a certain aspect of Woody Allen's film experience. We could go back to 1979's Interiors, which is a movie that, after Annie Hall, right, is a movie where everyone says, look, this is Alan trying to be Ingmar Bergman. It's set in a entirely non-Jewish context. You know, these have been, since that period at least, these have been things that he's been exploring about. And as you say, the world has changed, and to a certain extent, perhaps less than we would like him to have, he has changed with it. But these preoccupations and sentiments, I've been showing clips ranging from Take the Money and Run to 1997 when Deconstructing Harry came out. And that, you know, a lot of these preoccupations and sentiments have stayed largely continuous. And that's all that I would say, right? I mean, you know, we're almost finished, so I'll take 2 more points and then I will thank you all very much. Yes, please, in the back, and then you, ma'am. You have the honor of the last. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question, right? I think that what Alan would say, who certainly has had his share of, you know, people saying, well, is this good for the Jews, right, is that he would share the response of his literary idol, Philip Roth, who I had mentioned before, who says basically, I'm an artist. I don't really care what is or is not good for the Jew. I'm creating literary characters, and if I feel that they are successful artistic creations, then that is what makes me happy. That may not be a solution that other people or anybody else would like, but that is the solution that I think that he feels the most comfortable with. Ma'am. You lost the thread. Well, that is as good a note as any on which to end this. I will ask you again, November 20th, I'm talking about the films of Mel Brooks, a slightly lower level of intellectual discourse, I suspect. But thank you all very, very much.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.